Say hi to everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nolan Tremellian. I'm going to be the moderator for today's panel.
Awesome. So I'll hand over the microphone to Nolan, and Nolan will take over from here.
Perfect. Give me just a second and I'll share my screen. So we're going to be having our panel discussion today on the next chapter of ubiquitous computing and how we can grow securely and safely. So a little bit about myself. I'm a student at Columbia University studying electrical engineering, and so I'm based in New York. I'm the founder of Nebula Education, and we've done a little bit of work with ubiquitous computing, which we'll have Ben Brusset, who's going to be one of our panelists, and talk about ubiquitous computing in the education space. And then I've also worked in sales engineering at R3, and that's where where I know my other panelist here, Artem, for the work that he's done there. I currently research analog AI systems at the Columbia Integrated Systems Laboratory, and in particular, I explore low power keyword spotting. Our first panelist is going to be Artem. He is a research engineer at Aragon and focuses on secure computation engineering. He's worked as a sales engineer for 2 years at R3, designing how to change the financial industry with confidential computing, as well as a research engineer, again, at Aragon for 1.5 years, exploring cryptography protocols as an alternative privacy enhancing technology. And then our last panelist is Ben Brusset. He's a tech advocate and director of Reinspire, a Madison, Wisconsin-based initiative. They work with cutting-edge IoT technology, including a lot of aspects of ubiquitous computing, to introduce students and educators to their power. And he's done a lot of work with robotics, engineering, and programming, and integrating that into students' everyday lives. So with that, I'll hand it over to Artem, and he's going to talk a little bit about ubiquitous computing and what he does.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Just give me a moment. I'll share my screen, and I think we can go. So. Just to confirm, everyone can see my screen? Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
So today I would like to start the conversation and talk a bit about confidential ubiquitous computing. So here I combine two terms, confidential computing and ubiquitous computing, which I will slowly cover in this presentation so that we can be all aligned on what this means. So first, I will talk about ubiquitous computing and current challenges, both in security and privacy, which are there. And then we'll slowly introduce the idea of confidential computing and give a few ideas of how can this be applied with ubiquitous computing and how it can work together. So to start off, let's just quickly be on the same line about what ubiquitous computing is. Though the idea was originally originated in about 20th century, the end of the 20th century. Right now, we are actually in the process of seeing this happening. So I would say ubiquitous computing for me is seeing the computers and devices everywhere around us. So that's just an example of where we can see devices already this day. And I only see this growing forward. So smart clothes, smart gadgets, chips inside of us. So essentially, we will interact with computers everywhere in our life. And as you can see here, it kind of slowly gets us to the topic which I want to talk about today. Just look at the amount of data which is generated by all these devices which you interact with. I mean, the most simple ones might not have memory, but they are more and more advanced devices, especially if we look, for example, at IoT, which start to interact with the internet. They store data, they share data, and of course, this leads to a lot of security and privacy threats, which we might experience in the future. So just going forward a bit, if we look at the example of current threats and why this can be devastating for us, well, of course, just having machines are hackable, and of course, it can impact our personal comfort. For example, when your fridge stops working because it was connected to the internet and someone just disabled it from the online, or an example of this coffee machine, which someone just decided to make a computer out of. Well, the risks can be a lot bigger. So in Mr. Robots, the example was of how hackers could hunt someone using their smart home and potentially even cause some damage to them using all the devices, smart devices inside of the house. And of course, if we see these devices being more and more integrated in our lives, then it's reasonable to assume that threats that would come to us will only be growing bigger, and we need to be very careful about how we work with it. Well, we also should talk about just sensitive data being exposed. Imagine how much information is collected through devices like CCTV cameras and other computers which we use, especially the ones connected to the internet. So just this sheer amount of data is a reasonable excuse to be very careful about your privacy. A good example of that can be the cameras that are installed inside of your home, for example, which you try to watch your toddler, for example, from the office to see if he's okay, but an attacker can eventually access them as well and just observe your full private life without you ever suspecting this. So that's not a threat. And finally, of course, a lot of money. So you might all be aware of the numerous scams which are happening online. And of course, these scams usually rely on having some insight about a person. So again, some personal data and some personal behavior, which can be used based on all the devices we interact with. So these are just in a list of some possible threats, and they're all quite serious, but this is not an exhaustive list, and everyone can definitely come with a few more. So just to kind of look more where the threats can be coming from, on the right-hand side, you can see a smart lock, which I took from a video of Lockpick and Lure. This is a person who just cracks locks for fun, and this was one of the locks he tried to crack. And the idea here is this is a smart lock. This is definitely a machine, and potentially which you can unlock with your phone. And this kind of shows how machines, well, this lock protects your property, and essentially the security of this lock equals the security of your home. Therefore, you can understand how potentially threatful attacks can be. And again, on the left-hand side, we can see a short list of what can go wrong in such devices. So there can be a security software flaw, which allows an attacker to invoke privileged functions, which they shouldn't be. The physical device can be manipulated. So a lot of IoT and devices and general machines, they're not often considered from a security point of view. So people sometimes overlook this aspect, and this can be because they're more interested in the software part than about the physical security of a device. So for example, a lock can be secured from a software perspective using the best cryptographic protocols, but nothing stops a person from just cracking it open and doing some malicious stuff with it. Of course, people sometimes make mistakes on who they can trust. So imagine you are working, your device is interacting with other devices outside of the home, and it just assumes that all these devices will behave correctly. So for example, when it gets a message from device X, it should do action Y. But should we assume that such interactions are always valid, that meaning that no one can impersonate device X and send this comment maliciously, therefore obtaining an illegal action? This is also something to consider, especially when building intricate networks of devices. The biggest factor is human factor, and honestly, there couldn't be too much done over there besides providing an intuitive interface for human interaction. And yes, I think that's kind of just make it intuitive, simple, and explain to humans what are the security flaws as clearly as possible. And finally, I think that one of the most interesting aspects, again, which you won't have a lot of control of, is breaching supply chains. So by this, I mean, you might be reliant on some external libraries, you might be reliant on other services, and they might be breached, and then your security will be compromised as well. It's actually happened a few times when, for example, software companies which depend on repository managers. Well, the repository managers can get hacked, and then you can get illegal software running on your devices just because someone manipulated this package manager and pushed a new version which hasn't been audited. So it's just a few list of different attack vectors which I think you should be aware of and should consider. And I would like to now talk a bit about one way you can help working with that and help mitigate these problems, in particular confidential computing. So I worked for this technology for already 2 years. It has a range of applications. The technology itself, I think it's dated more than 20 years ago. And the original idea is to develop such processors which would not be possible to manipulate physically, and which would run trusted computations on it. By this, I mean, you will not be able to change the what executes on this device because it will be protected on a hardware level. So I'll go in a bit deeper into how it works, but if you look at the next slide, these are the main benefits of what this brings to the table. So the first benefit, well, just let's go back a bit into history. Originally, we had devices which protected integrity, which means that the code itself, for example, couldn't be just changed arbitrarily using invocations from other parts of the system. It just split your code base into two parts, secure and insecure. And the secure part, you have to usually minimize it. And the idea was that no one from the insecure part can access the secure part, therefore your device is safe. But now this changed a bit. So the new idea is to actually also have the secure part fully encrypted. So even if someone gets physical access to it, physical access to the chip, they will not be able to manipulate the chip and extract information out of it. And therefore, that's what I say, that the confidential, the data is always encrypted. And the physical attack level when you use confidential computing is almost impossible. They are potential scientific attacks, but they are only theoretical and they're very hard to pull off in real world. Especially, no one would bother doing this on a small machine. So the second part is that, again, you have this code isolation where you only have the most crucial parts running in an isolated environment, which cannot be manipulated from a potential vulnerable part. So let's say your application has a network communication part, and this might be potentially dangerous as someone can do something malicious with it and invoke some functions from it. And let's say your device also collects your data, and this data will be stored in the secure part. Therefore, no one, even if they have network access to a device and will manage to invoke some functions, they will never get access to the data, and therefore data is always secure. And what's more about that, even if someone pulled the device apart, the data will also be encrypted, so no one can manipulate it. Let's go forward. The two other benefits is that you can actually verify that the device is operating correctly, in the sense that you can verify the integrity of the secure part. If you look at it, the device can calculate essentially the hash of its code, what's running inside of the secure part. Therefore, another person can always verify using an attestation. This is an idea of how this chip can attest that it's running securely. So via the attestation, other person can verify that this computer is indeed running what it should be running, and it's not being impersonated. So remember what I told about the trust model, where someone can impersonate someone. Well, this would be impossible. And finally, just to add, these chips can also attest that they are secure, and you can prove that the chip has not been manipulated, and this kind of provides another security level for that. So I think that's enough of talking about the benefits of confidential computing, and we can just look at a few use cases how this can be used. So the first use case is when you have some data which is, for example, collected by your machines, and you push this to a centralized server where you want to process this data and get some insight from that. And this data is sensitive, let's say. So previously, you would just push this data to the server, and you would be not aware if the server has been compromised or if the host of the server. If the host of the server has being hacked. But here, using confidential computing, you can essentially secure the server so that only trusted functions can run, and also your sensors, in this case, would be able to verify that this server is who it is. So they won't send your data to arbitrary connections. Just being aware of the time, I'll quickly go through the next use case, and I think this is the more interesting one. Here, we can see how two devices can essentially communicate with each other and verify that each of them has not been compromised using, again, converged computing, and therefore then securely exchange information so that no one can get access to this information, and also to be sure that the system is still working as it should be. So yeah, here are just a few steps of how this can be implemented. After this, I can share a list of links of where you can read more about quantum computing and potentially start putting this into your solution. The first use case where you kind of change your centralized server, if you have it, it's a lot simpler. You can start as simply as just hosting it in the cloud that supports confidential computing. Or you can potentially grab your own chip that supports confidential computing and host it there. Or for the use case 2, it's a bit harder, but again, there's RM, which provides such chips which support confidential computing, and you can definitely use these, but it would take some time to integrate and, again, to make your applications work. So I guess use case 1 is a lot simpler to pull off in the time constraints you have. So just to go over a few trends which I see. So there is a reason why the iPhone is there. So iPhones and most of the Apple devices already have the chips that support converged computing. So the idea there is, for example, when you lose your iPhone, no one is able to override it because such chips kind of protect the integrity of the iPhone. And again, like no attacker, no one can rewrite the information inside of it. And like this just slowly implies that we'll see more and more of this happening in the world, where devices will not just assume that they should trust someone, the other device, but they can actively verify that the other device is who it is and has not been compromised. Therefore, we will definitely see improved data security. And overall, I definitely see the increase of data being collected. Like there's no question about that. The more devices we have, the more integrations with devices we do, the more data there will be. And of course, this will be personal sensitive data. So there needs to be solutions for that. I also believe because now the devices will be able to secure the data, that we'll see more ownership of the data. And that's actually what we already see in some, like, for example, in Web3, where people now control what the data they have and can say where they want to share it. But here, again, because even centralized services will not be able to just arbitrarily collect the data, but they might need consent of the person, we'll see the ownership tendency. Yeah, and finally, as I mentioned before, of course, tighter integration between devices, because now you can verify that who you're communicating with is secure. So overall, I see some positive trends, and hopefully it all comes to life. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Artem. Ben will be presenting in just a minute, and as he pulls his slides up, I would encourage all of you, if you have questions, to please leave them in the chat. After Ben, we'll be moving into a roundtable discussion, and then we'll have time for question and answer. So that's where we'll pull your questions from.
While I have time, Nolan, should I share links here, or there will be another opportunity to send it to participants?
I think, yeah, if you could put them in the chat, that would be great, Artem. Thank you.
One more second. I'm just trying to get this pulled up. Sure. This is a bit funny, but I'm hitting the resume share button and it's not quite resuming. Uh, okay, there we go. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Wonderful. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Brusset, and I'm really excited to get the chance to talk to all of you and kind of share a little bit more of my perspective on ubiquitous computing, IoT, and to kind of critically examine the implications of this technology, as it becomes more prevalent in the near future. And I think it is really important to consider the human impact of these developments, right? I mean, when we think about how omnipresent technology has become in our lives, it's very important to be conscious of how it's impacting us, both directly and indirectly. Perfect. Okay, so a little bit of background on my work. Like Nolan mentioned, I'm currently working as the director of Re-Inspire initiative. Re-Inspire is a Wisconsin-based nonprofit organization, and we kind of operate both at the state and at the local level. Our mission is centered around two core tenets. Those are going to be advocacy and action, right? We advocate for more resources to support our STEM teachers in the education system. And then we take action by getting into K-12 schools and introducing them to STEM concepts through a combination of speaker events, hands-on workshops, and more stuff like that. And really, I'm very proud of the work that we do. It's been the continuation of about 7 years of my work with STEM education and K-12 age students. And they're going to be primarily from underprivileged backgrounds. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a business major. Outside of my nonprofit work, I don't have background in STEM. But I think for me, one of the most influential pieces of my nonprofit work has got to be that it's given me a new lens through which I can learn and consider so many concepts. I've given, or rather, I've had incredible exposure to industry leaders and people who are really on the cutting edge of innovation in a variety of STEM fields, engineering, medicine, SE. But I also have this really wonderful base-up perspective from working within the education system and with these students for the past couple of years. So let's dive in, right? Computing is all around us. Maybe it hasn't reached a state of complete ubiquity yet, but we're absolutely on track. Amazon Alexa enabled devices, Apple's HomeKit ecosystem. These are products that never would have had the capability to compute 10, 20 years ago. And they've really taken off in terms of social acceptance, especially over the last 5 years. They're becoming more integrated into our homes and our lives than ever before. And I think this is really due in no small part to the role of the pandemic, and the amount of time that people were forced to spend at home. And so I think it's essential that we, think about how these products have changed how we live our lives, how we relax, how we enjoy, how we work. They absolutely have the potential to totally revolutionize how we experience the world. And that's where we get into the applications to the education industry. So when I say the education industry, I want to kind of open our aperture to a scale even greater than just our schooling systems, right? Learning is something that we are constantly doing, in both structured and unstructured settings. We have a really big opportunity in front of us. Think about corporate HR projects, continuing education programs, new hire trainings. These are all places where we have the opportunity to integrate new ways to learn. And so I guess the question is, what does that look like? So one of my core beliefs is how technology and, a new generation of interconnectedness like we're experiencing now brings the opportunity to radically change teaching and learning. And what is even possible in the field of educational instruction. First and foremost, obviously, being able to connect outside of a geographically isolated area is going to create countless new opportunities. Instruction doesn't have to be physical, it can be digital. And we've already seen this taking place. And like I mentioned before, the pandemic certainly accelerated that process, what we could have imagined 5 years ago. Remote school, remote work, online college, these are all examples of how technology and has enabled people to have more freedom than ever in accessing education. And these technologies, they're also going to enable more experiential learning, which has been kind of the focus of our work at Re-Inspire. By adding more dimensions to the learning experience than traditional instruction, we can enable higher quality and more engaging instruction. E-learning is already a massive industry, like I was talking about, online college, online school. These are fully remote colleges, graduate programs, online licensing, certifications, even, like online pre-K programs. So what IoT is going to help transform it into is something that's not seen as a secondary option to in-person learning. By enabling the active participation of the student, online learning is going to become more engaging and result in a higher degree of information and skill retention. And this isn't solely limited to academic applications either. Say you want to take an online cooking class. If your utensils can sense pressure, for example, all of a sudden the system can provide feedback on technique that would previously have been impossible. And those are the types of applications that I'm really excited to see roll out into education across the board over the next couple of years. So right now, most learning takes place in a very analog setting with a very strong emphasis on, verbal instruction, reading and writing. Is that the best way to learn, or is it just kind of what we've been forced to accommodate based on, inferior access to technology? So I want to talk about this little experiment. Back in 1999, AT&T developed a project based around IoT hardware called the AT&T Virtual Classroom. This classroom was totally, decked out with all of the greatest pre-2K technologies, laptops and video and audio recording capabilities, VCRs, CD and DVD burners, digital microscope, scientific materials, and tons of education-focused software. So it really was a completely holistic learning environment, for 1999. Obviously, most of these capabilities could be fit into, like a single smartwatch now, but, it was 1999. So the point of this experiment was to research the question, how can the way that we learn be supplemented by technology? And that question remains relevant today, albeit with substantially greater access to substantially more capable technology. And so what this kind of helped us to realize is that learning doesn't have to take the form of presentations and lectures. Truly effective learning requires real hands-on experiences. And with the advances in IoT hardware and integration that we've seen over the past few decades, this has become more achievable than ever. What does that look like in terms of practical applications to the field, though? The answer is already out there, right? We've already started seeing how companies are taking this technology and adding it into their education programming. In both internal and externally facing roles, IoT has begun to change the way that we learn. Take Apple as an example. Their IoT ecosystem, HomeKit, allows users to seamlessly connect products from a variety of producers and brands across their day. It also enables users to create automations that can be triggered by any number of inputs, right? Say the last person leaving the home, when a door is opened, or when a coffee maker is turned on. So this is all to say, tech companies like Apple are very familiar with the capabilities of IoT and bringing them into the home. So here's the interesting part, though. Apple runs a series of community education programs, workshops in their stores called Today at Apple. And so these sessions create opportunities for experts and learners to connect, studying a wide variety of things, photography, video editing, how to use an iPhone, stuff like that. And during these sessions, IoT is seamlessly integrated into the teaching methodology. The instructor's devices are able to pair with the classrooms, files can be shared and updated fluidly, and features like augmented reality can even further enhance the learning experience for the learner. By removing the hassle of cords and extraneous clicking and taking out some of the guesswork, Apple is able to increase the value of its programming and place the focus back on the learning itself. And I think that's really interesting to see that is already being integrated in a very externally facing role. So one of the most critical parts of IoT computing has got to be the data, just like we were just talking about, right? So much of technology's predictive abilities, what makes it helpful in the first place is based on data, both your personal habits and aggregate data that's, being pulled from millions of other users. And once that data can be tracked and analyzed, we can pull out some really useful insights at both a very high level and a very intimate level. Companies are able to utilize that data to develop their training programs and ensure the right amount of attention is given to the right subjects, thereby reducing onboarding times, increasing efficiency, and not exclusively for onboarding, that's throughout the company's learning processes. So it's clear that IoT has myriad applications through learning in the workplace, right? What about in the education system? Re-Inspire, what we're doing right now is we are working to develop innovative new ways to integrate these technologies and concepts into programming for K-12 students. That might look like a workshop exploring how devices can communicate with each other and execute programs based on certain inputs, right? Or it might be a developer coming in to talk about the process of creating a holistic IoT system. We're really interested in exploring the possibilities that will be enabled by IoT because we know that it will definitely represent the next big phase in STEM career possibilities, from hardware to software engineering and across the board in STEM. And this is kind of going to be, the flip side of the technological turbulence that's being catalyzed by the oncoming of ubiquitous computing, the human impact. My work with students in public schools has illustrated to me, the extreme levels of inequity in our education system. Many of these kids just don't have access to the quality resources and materials that they need in order to really latch on to material. And so we know that STEM is one of the best ways to raise young people out of socioeconomically disadvantaged environments. But in order for that to happen, the education and the exposure needs to be accessible. And so that's why I feel like the work that Re-Inspire does is so important. We are enabling the growth and development of the next generation of young STEM professionals. By creating equity from the bottom, we can help support the sustainable growth of these communities further down their careers. Advances in technology, they always cause the social divide to either widen or to mend. And the rise of ubiquitous computing, like we've been talking about, I imagine the entire day, is going to be a major element of tech in the next couple of years. And so it's extremely important that we ensure that we're raising people up instead of dividing us further. And I think programs like this are really essential to building out that knowledge and awareness from the top down. So with that in mind, I think that it's clear that we're in for a really exciting ride over the next couple of years with the innovation that's happening right now in UC and IoT. And, if we manage these opportunities right, we have the chance to create some really deeply impactful effects that we're going to see the influence of throughout every part of our lives, right? IoT has nearly limitless potential to change the way that we learn, from kindergarten to MBAs to those security compliance trainings that you have to do every 6 months at work. And I'm beyond excited to see how those changes are going to play out. And I think it's incredible that I get to talk to all of you today and provide a little bit more of my perspective. And I know that you guys are going to be the ones who are at the forefront of those evolutions. So that's all I have today, guys. Good luck with your competition.
Thank you, Ben. So now we're going to move into some roundtable discussion, some questions for our panelists. The first one is focused on interoperability. So interoperability is a recurring issue in a lot of technologies today. I think we hear most of it in not only ubiquitous computing, but also in the cryptography space, a lot of times with cryptocurrencies. And so for you two, do you see that there's technologies coming out in industry today that are going to allow for better interoperability between ubiquitous computing systems?
Can I take it? The first one?
Sure.
So my personal opinion, of course, this is coming. And as usual with these systems that just arrive to the market, at first, there's a variety of technological stacks that are being built at the same time, and it's hard to have a consistent system, to build a consistent standard just because of the rapidity of innovation. But personally, I see that this is coming to the end right now, and well, the innovation will definitely be coming, but there's already a few trends which are definitely being seen. So for example, we have a standard cryptographic protocols such as HTTPS for communication, which has been established around 10, 15, like the HTTPS 5 years ago, it has been established. And now this is the way for us to communicate with the servers, our browsers communicate with the servers. So there's definitely the same happening in the world of ubiquitous computing. As I've just talked, for example, the computational computing is just more and more stabilizing. There are now standard solutions, and these solutions learn how to work with each other because of the problems the customers have. And we'll already see the move for having the same standards, for example, for communication of security of such components. For example, Intel is already developing their attestation service, which would be independent of the hardware behind it. So yes, I definitely see this coming quite soon. So maybe Ben has some more.
Like I said, my background's not in technology. So in terms of, the intricacies rather of the integration, I'm not sure that I can speak on that. I can speak more to, the impact on a broader scale once it's been implemented.
Great. So a question that might be geared a little bit more towards Ben and his role. What role do schools and tech companies play in really bringing the ideas and tools of ubiquitous computing that they're bringing to market? How do they integrate them into the classroom or the office in the best way?
I think that relationship is something that's really interesting. Tech companies have a lot of resources that are very, very valuable, for these schools and for education. And like we talked about, the applications of these technologies in the learning environment are limitless. But I think they play, a particularly interesting role in bringing ubiquitous computing into the classroom and, into the office, because so many barriers of entry kind of exist in those spaces. Schools are underfunded. Resources are a massive issue. Time management is a massive issue for these teachers who are already overworked and don't necessarily have the time to devote to managing these new technologies and integrating them and figuring out, how are we going to bring this into the classroom? So, I mean, simply put, teachers don't have the time to learn every aspect of these tools. So tech companies need to work to ensure that the tools are made accessible, right? Accessibility is a massive concept in tech. I know, but Arduino, I think, is a great example of a company that's working to do exactly this in terms of making their technology easy to access for both the teachers and the students. So that really smooths over the integration process.
Artem, did you have anything to add for that one?
No, not much. I think
then I guess for both of you, what are some of the issues and challenges that startups or maybe the tech industry in general faces in terms of security and kind of things that are best practices or maybe examples of what not to do?
Yeah. Okay. Again, that's okay. I can start with that. This is a very good and the answer for this question might be a whole dissertation at least, but let's start one by one. First, not a lot of projects consider security when they're being developed. I think a lot of times people think security can be done later once the product is already developed and they have more time on their hands to look into this unknown area of how to make their system secure, because it's not enough to just read a blog post and say, okay, I'm going to use this technology X to magically make everything private, everything unhackable. It doesn't work this way. And especially it's like people will have to study and will have to probably even hire good engineers to understand how to indeed secure their solutions. The worst part for that is that a lot of decisions that can be made might really backfire. So what seems quite obvious might actually be a huge security threat. So an example for that could be password generation, or generally like how to store passwords. The usual idea in the old days was just to store in your server on the company side the passwords, and then when a user makes a connection and wants to log into his service, you'll just check this password with the one stored in the server, and if they match, then wonderful, everything is good. But as I think most of people here might already know, this is not the best approach, and now there are ideas of adding seeds to the password, hashing the password, so it's a lot harder to crack. And overall, to learn all these techniques and understand what are the best practices, it just takes a lot of time on educating yourself. So doing some extra courses, or even hiring a professional in that field, or hiring a whole analytics team who will assess your project and highlight all such problem points. Furthermore, like what not to do is definitely not build something like if you have a security threat, just don't try to solve it yourself. Because as for example, in cryptography, never try to implement a cryptography protocol, as there might be a lot of very intricate parts in it, which if you mess up, it will essentially undermine your whole system. And if we're talking, for example, about ubiquitous computing, just imagine how much personal data you handle of people's, because it's like the idea of ubiquitous computing is to add to our human everyday lives, and they just interact with us constantly. They gather so much personal data, and any leak of this data is potentially detrimental. So just always try to find a solution which is already out there. And if you have any questions about what to do, ask. Don't just assume, and don't put it off developing the new secure solution, because well, the moment your product starts working, it already needs to be secure. So just keep this in mind, and yeah, be careful out there.
That's some great advice. And I think the last question for our roundtable discussion then would be, what are some assets that future talent coming into this space should have?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think a diverse mix of talent is always going to be a breath of fresh air while integrating into the classroom, at least. It's easy for those of you with technical backgrounds to think that something's simple enough, while in reality, that's not the case. So making sure that we're considering accessibility from the perspective of a normal person is something that I think is really integral. But having a diverse team that's able to ensure that those assumptions are challenged and that the resources are available is something that's really key. And I think building that out will definitely lead to success.
Mm-hmm. I personally can't add much more to that, in the sense that I definitely agree that you need to be very diverse, and you need to understand how others work, because again, you're building devices that others will use on a day-to-day basis. And if you're not the one who ever used this before, it will be very hard for you to come up with a solution. And if I were just to come back to my presentation quickly, I mentioned the users being a potentially the biggest security issue in any system. So again, you need to always consider how the user will act, and bring in talent and bringing people who understand, for example, human-computer interactions is vital. I think it's not about having the hard skill set, it's about understanding how the product will be used.
Great.
Yep.
So we'll move on to some question and answers. So there's some questions in the chat from Bobby. This one is to Ben. He agrees with you and is curious if you've seen any success cases in kind of this integration. I know you mentioned Arduino, but maybe you could talk a little bit more on that.
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot, jumping back to the K-12 school system, that's the area where I have the most experience. I think there are a lot of schools that are doing things right here. It's difficult in this economy to manage the integration of these products into your classrooms, right? Schools are underfunded, and we all know that. I think one example might be a local school district that we worked with. It's south of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but they're working to integrate hands-on projects into their classrooms that kind of cover these STEM concepts. And I think that is a very powerful move to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of getting these kids access to education. The school district is, funding is an issue as always, but a lot of the kids who attend school here are, they're from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. They're kids who might not have the opportunity to access STEM through their parents or their families or their friends. So bringing it into the classroom in this kind of exciting, engaging way is a way that I think that the school district is doing something right and getting these kids early exposure to STEM, even if it's not in depth. It's laying the groundwork, it's laying the foundation, I think, for more exploration as they develop in their academic careers.
Great, thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
This question is for Artem. Artem, from Jim, they're a very early stage on a smart home IoT project, and they're wondering if you have any suggestions on how to access user data, but not too much, as it's a sensitive area with data leaks and user privacy.
Like being afraid of giving financial advice, same goes for security. Giving security advice is also potentially very detrimental, but it all depends what you want to use the user data for. If, let's say, you just have an in-house device which will not ever communicate with someone else, the data it collects, and it needs this data, so on-device processing, where the device will figure out your habits using the data, then I think it's totally fine to do some data collection. Again, there are better security practices where you would ensure that this device doesn't have internet connection, or it has isolation between the data part and the network communication part, so that an attacker potentially wouldn't be able to go into the system and just extract all the data out. So yeah, if this is the case, I would say go for it. Consider, again, controlled computing. It's very interesting, and I believe it will be a very next boom. So if you jump on it early, you definitely have an upper hand. If, on the other hand, you are considering sending this data to the server, I would be very cautious about what data you are planning to send. Well, first, there are potential regulations on how data is being managed in different jurisdictions. For example, the famous EU GDPR, which will potentially prohibit you from hosting one central server in one country and then using your devices among the whole world. This potentially is an issue. Additionally, just having a lot of information in one place is always dangerous. So I would, again, consider using more enhanced protection techniques over the data. For example, what I talked about, controlled computing, you can definitely make your server work in as a controlled computer, where all the data will always be encrypted even when you process it. So I would say, depending on the route you go, you can, again, free to collect as much data as you can, but apply best security practices, which I just went through. Also, just to quickly add, make sure the way you communicate is secure. Check a certificate, use HTTPS, make sure you understand who you're sending data to, and don't leave any ports. Sorry, I'm going maybe too technical, but don't leave any ports open.
Great, that's all really important advice. And then I guess for both of you, you might have some different perspectives to offer here, as Ben's in the US and Adam is in the UK. But do either of you see a depression in the tech job market?
Just looking in, I think on a micro scale, yes, our economy is not in a wonderful place right now. We're heading to a slightly less wonderful place. And obviously you're going to see the impact of that across the board. I mean, all of the jobs are down, right? But on a macro scale, absolutely not. I think that we're only beginning to see how ubiquitous, right, technology is going to become in our lives. And in order to fuel that, you need jobs, right? You need developers. And a lot of the work that's being done in the tech industry is not stuff that can be substituted in the same way that you can have substitutes in manufacturing and supply chain, stuff like that. So short answer, in the immediate term, yes. Long term, absolutely not.
I might add a different spin on that answer. I also believe that right now the tech space will definitely grow, and for the next 5 years, there'll be a huge increase in the job market even further. However, I'm personally a big skeptic And I believe that AI is potentially getting more and more advanced, where some more basic roles will potentially be not needed, in the sense that when we talked about who can design machines and like what assets they need to know and have, I think the technical expertise will slowly decline. The need for technical expertise will decline, and there'll be more no-code solutions which people will be able to use. So it will be, again, more about having ideas and implementing ideas rather than having skill set. But if I would just talk about my privacy and security space, so far there is a huge under stuff in there. So if you kind of look for a job opportunity, just consider this.
Great. It's nice to have both kinds of perspectives there. We'll give just another second for any last questions that might be popping into the chat. Otherwise, on behalf of Hack Hub and myself, thank you, Ben and Artem. This has been really insightful and very helpful, and we really appreciate your time today. I'll hand it over to the Hack Hub team.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,